Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I would like to discuss Lenormand, which is a system that I am learning, and you'll know from the title that I specifically want to discuss how to make Lenormand decks and the Lenormand system more affirming of 2SLGBTQ plus folks. I had mentioned in a previous video that June being Pride Month or Pride Awareness Month, I would be making some queer-focused content. So this is a part of that and an important conversation, I think. It has been one, I will say, that I've been experiencing a bit of difficulty getting around to making, and there are a number of reasons for that. But one issue that I did want to bring to folks' attention, if you were not already aware of this, is some issues around censoring of language that's happening on YouTube right now. So specifically, I have been having the experience of my comments in live chats and premieres censored if I use the word queer, which is the word that I use to describe myself. I first became aware of this issue in a live chat with Katie Flowers' Blossom Book Club. And so basically what was happening there is that I would make comments with the word queer in the comment. And we were discussing queering the tarot, the book. So it was a word that was coming up quite a bit. And I would make these comments and it would all look fine on my end that I had put a comment into the chat. But it became apparent that my comments weren't being seen by any of the other participants in the chat, nor were they being seen by Katie, who was hosting the chat. And so these comments were just being deleted by YouTube, but it wasn't telling me that they were being deleted. And they weren't not being shown because, the host, in that case, Katie, had put any filter on the word queer or had, was choosing to not show my comments, was choosing to, decline them or anything like that. YouTube was just doing this, right? And so I wanted folks to be aware of it, particularly folks who host lives, who host premieres, because you won't be being alerted of these comments, right? And it kind of affected me more than I realized at the time. Like, it was frustrating because it's like I can't say what I want to say, and I'm having to find ways to articulate myself that YouTube deems better than the ones that I would pick for myself. But, it's really hard to give an account of yourself when you're told that your vocabulary is not allowed, and it sucked. And so I wanted to just make sure that folks were aware that this is happening because, if you're hosting a live or a premiere, it's probably going to be happening on yours as well. I appreciate, obviously, that, this decision on YouTube's part to censor comments like that is in no way directed at me personally and, is probably made from a... if I'm being generous, is being made from a well-intentioned place of wanting to not show comments that are discriminatory or hateful, But in this case, the effect is really silencing, and that's really problematic. It's unappreciated. So if you're a person who hosts lives or premieres, you might want to let folks know in those chats at the start that that is happening, right? Because your participants might be also being silenced and neither you nor they nor the other participants in the chat won't even know about it. So that little preamble aside, Lenormand and making Lenormand 2SLGBTQ plus affirming and friendly and celebratory. I wanted to talk about this because I experienced a lot of barriers trying to get into Lenormand and trying to work up to trying to learn Lenormand that are specifically around these kinds of issues. So I wanted to share, my very beginner's perspectives on what some of those issues are and what some things that we can do as for those who are deck creators in particular, and also as readers, to address these kinds of issues. I did talk last June, in a video about 2SLGBTQ plus representation in the tarot. And so I thought that this video would be, a bit of a different angle. I do think that some of those same issues that I talked about in that other video apply to Lenormand as well, but I also think Lenormand, in terms of just how the system is structured, has some additional issues that are different from tarot as well, that are worth talking about. So I did not start learning Lenormand until this year. Of course, I'm interested in it in that I love learning new systems. I love learning new card systems in particular of divination and reading. But I was really put off by the significator card system. And here, folks who are experienced Lenormand readers are just going to have to put up with the fact that I'm talking as though you, the audience, maybe are not that familiar with Lenormand, just so that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So, in a traditional Lenormand deck, there's 2 cards, 28 and 29, which are significator cards, and one of them is the man card and one of them is the woman card. Sometimes they're called the gentleman and the lady, or some other variation there, but they're the man card and the woman card. And so the traditional approach is that one of those cards represents the querent, either yourself if you're reading for yourself or a client, and the other represents someone significant in that person's life, for example, a significant other, right? And there are other ways significators come up in Lenormand, but I'm just going to focus on these 2 cards here. So we can see here, right, that there's some immediate issues. If the system presumes that every person can be represented by either a man card or a woman card, there is no space there for non-binary genders, for gender non-conforming folks, for intersex identifying folks, to be represented in a good way. There's also not a great way to represent relationships that are not heterosexual relationships. So given who I am as a queer person and, who I might read for, though I mostly read for myself, but, my community and friends and family, Lenormand as a system was really not something that I could figure out any way to get into. Because it's like, how am I supposed to work with this? Like, this is not set up for me to work with it, right? And that's really difficult. But I wanted to learn, right? I wanted to learn. So I bought this book, The Complete Lenormand Oracle Handbook by Kathleen Matthews. And this is one of the most comprehensive books on Lenormand that I've come across. And I looked at the man and woman card in this book. And sure enough, the man card section in the book describes man as the male significator, right? And so the nouns and adjectives that this card is are a male person, potency, yourself, himself, or every man, male, masculine, proactive. Then the woman card, the woman is the female significator. Nouns include female person, fertility, yourself, herself, or every woman, female, feminine, and sensitive. So here, not only do we have, exactly what I'd expected in terms of the man card represents men and the female card represents women, we also have the male card described as potent and proactive, and the woman card described as fertile and sensitive, right? So on top of the cisnormativity and the heteronormativity, we have some essentialism and gender stereotypes baked in as well, right? Which is just another layer of problematic for me to try to struggle through. But in the back, in the index, and the index for this book is excellent, by the way. And I'm using this book as an example because it's a presentation of traditional approaches to Lenormand. I don't present this book, I'm presenting this book as representing the barriers to traditional Lenormand for me. It is not in any way, I want to be clear, me saying that this is like a bad book. I'm using this book to learn Lenormand, so in no way do I intend it that way. But in the index, there's a section for significators and all the pages that talk about significators. And one of the things you can look up is significators for gay people. So, needless to say, for many of us, gay is not a language that represents every, queer person or every 2SLGBTQ plus person. But we have some acknowledgement of the fact that there's an issue here in that there's a section called significators for gay people. And there's 2 page numbers represented by that section in the index. And so I went to see what those were. And what I found out was that the rider card could be used to represent another man in a relationship with a man. So the rider card typically depicts a man on a horse. This card could be, kind of a second man card to represent a man in a relationship with the man represented by the querent. The problem with that immediately, though, is that all the other meanings that go with the rider card, like a message or news, a visitor, delivery, haste, and so on, those meanings kind of get lost. You don't have a card to represent those meanings if the rider is standing in for a male partner. The other indicator for significators for gay people is that the snake card, which has the Queen of Clubs on it, can stand in for a lesbian partner, right? Now, the snake card is generally read as a negative card in Lenormand. Unlike tarot, where I think a lot of us believe all the cards are simultaneously or possibly positive and negative. In Lenormand, some cards are positive and some cards are negative, and the snake is a negative one. And some of the terms associated with it here are difficult woman, rivalry, treachery, betrayal, envy, upset, hypocrisy, pride, and complexity. Oh, but it can also stand in for a lesbian. This at best feels like a shitty afterthought, to be quite blunt. So that's not great, right? There's been some effort here to acknowledge that, yes, people in same-sex relationships exist, and to identify other cards in the deck that could work to represent that, because the man and the woman card are not representative of every relationship. However, this solution, A, is just problematic, and B, it does nothing to unseat the gender binary built into the system, right? It's still operating on the assumption that every querent and every querent's partner or partners can be represented as either men or women in unproblematic ways. And given that there are not just two sexes and not just two genders, that is inaccurate, right? So this is a problem. And this is a problem for me getting into Lenormand in terms of just not seeing, me and the people I surround myself with in the deck, and not readily seeing, like, as a total beginner who's just trying to assess whether this is for me, not seeing any way to make it for me, not seeing any way to read for myself or others in a good way with this system, right? And I'm not a professional reader, and I'm certainly not a professional Lenormand reader, but immediately this poses to me questions for any professional reader as well, right? With this kind of traditional deck, how do you go about representing clients in a good way, right? A client coming to you, depending on the question they ask or, how they describe themselves, you may not know what their gender is, because you can't know someone's gender necessarily, or really, you can't know anyone's gender by just looking at them or just knowing what their name is, for example, on a piece of paper, on an email. You can't know someone's gender that way. And you certainly can't know the gender of someone's partner. So what kind of presumptions are baked into this system, right? What kind of presumptions is a professional reader left to make, right? If they follow the lead that the system is giving them, right? And this could be really alienating for a client, right? You start telling a lesbian client that a man's coming into her life as a partner, or you start talking about her husband. Not good. You will not get a repeat client that way. So I think that there's this problem where the cis normativity and heteronormativity of the system itself, when then interplaying with, perhaps even subconscious cis-normative and heteronormative assumptions and worldviews on the part of the reader, create really potentially problematic situations, right? Create the potential for very problematic interactions and problematic readings, and readings that are not accurate. So what do I do here, right? The first kind of idea that I came across, in addressing, as a way of addressing this issue in a better way, is some modern decks, and I don't have one to show you, are adding in extra significator cards, right? So are adding in an extra man card and an extra woman card as a way of saying, well, you know, if you're, say, reading for a man in a relationship with another man, or if you yourself are a gay man and you're reading for yourself, you can just take the woman cards out, have 2 man cards in, and there you go. You don't have to go trying to find some other card like the rider to represent a partner, because you have 2 man cards. And some decks I've seen even use this approach to incorporate more diversity in other respects. So perhaps having one of the man cards be of a lighter skin color and one of a darker skin color. The same thing with one of the woman cards, right? So these are the kind of first approach that I came across. But this is not really satisfactory either, right? It certainly shows a lot more thoughtfulness, I think, than suggesting that a lesbian partner should be represented by the snake. But at the same time, the problem of the gender binary and binary representation of gender is left intact in terms of the significators, right? So this is really a problem of the system of Lenormand and its utility for a lot of us, I think, at least in my experience, right? Really, really difficult. And so for a long time, you know, and you'll know if you've watched my channel previously, that this book was one of my book stack of shame books that had been sitting on my shelf unread. Guess why, right? This is why I could not, for the life of me, you know, and I'm a pretty innovative person, I like to think, you know, I could not figure out a way to work with this in a way that felt good to me, that made me want to learn Lenormand at all. And it was only because a couple of decks took different approaches that I am able to learn Lenormand now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those decks and to talk about what I think works about these couple of decks in particular. And again, I have a very, very small collection. If you know of any other Lenormand decks that have approaches to address some of these issues that you think I might be interested in, let me know. But I'm going to talk about 2 that I think have found interesting ways that maybe will work for other folks out there who, like me, are trying to find a deck that would make Lenormand a system that they could work with. The first one is the Story in Color Lenormand, created by Kelly Fitzgerald of The Truth in Story here on YouTube. And this deck actually comes in a mini version as well. And the mini version is great because when you're reading a Grand Tableau, which is a reading that involves the entire deck, and you only have so much table space, that's great. This is the larger one, though I do have both. And this is a abstract deck. The deck actually has no human figures in it at all, right? So we can see the representations are symbolic, using color, as the name suggests. And I really like that. But what Kelly has done with the man and woman card, instead of representing them that way, because again, there's no human figures in the deck at all, is to go this route. Querent and significant, right? So these are both gender neutral terms, right? A querent can be anyone, right? Anyone who is seeking the reading or who's doing the reading for themselves is a querent. And a significant could also be anyone. They're not binary gendered. They're not gendered at all, at least in the visual depictions. So what Kelly has done that I wanted to share in the guidebook, right? Talking about the querent card here. She writes that traditionally this is the man card of the Lenormand, right? But in this deck, it indicates either you or the person for whom you are doing the reading, i.e. the querent, right? She goes on to say, in the 1800s, it is not surprising that the binary of man and woman would be used for self and significant other, as it reflects the primary relationships of the time. Now, all kinds of relationships, including same-sex relationships, have been around forever in every society, everywhere, right? But I take this as speaking to right? That binary reflecting the normative relationship of the time, right? However, this dichotomy becomes problematic for the modern reader as it makes gender and relationship assumptions that may not apply, right? So directly talking about the problem of the traditional representations forcing a reader, and particularly a reader here who's reading for someone else, right? When I'm reading for myself, I know who I am. I know who my partners are. You know, I can make relevant assumptions to myself, fine. When you're reading for someone else, the traditional system invites normative assumptions, right, that are exclusionary. And I like that this book acknowledges that. Now, what Kelly has done is to say that she's used the single active dot borrowed from geomancy for the traditionally man card, and then has used the traditional double receptive dot, also borrowed from geomancy, to indicate that you are receptive to being a significant person to you or your querent, right? So there is still that sense of active and receptive energies or active and receptive figures, which is, or at least can be, a gendered dynamic. However, does very clearly say, for example, this card will always stand for the significant other of you or your querent, regardless of their gender, right? Regardless of their gender. So yes, while in the keywords section, and I believe there's no paper book anymore, I think it's an ebook, there's a picture and some keywords, and the keyword for significant does include receptive, water, yin, and feminine, right? But you know, if you wanted to read them that way, that's fine. But there's nothing really, you know, unless the geomancy figures really, you know, shape how you see these cards, there's nothing in these cards to me, as someone looking at them, that are gendered at all, right? And the book is very clearly acknowledging of and communicative of the reason for this. And like, coming across this deck was a total game changer for me. And this is why I decided I could learn Lenormand, right? Because of this. The second deck that I want to talk about, that I also think does a good job here, is the Green Glyphs Lenormand by James R. Eads, which I backed on Kickstarter. And the Green Glyphs Lenormand, I have more cards in my pouch than what is traditionally read with, but there's a couple of things that happen in the Green Glyphs Lenormand to make it a more 2SLGBTQ plus accessible and affirming deck, right? So I've done a video about this deck before, but you know, I was so excited about this deck, and I'm still so excited about this deck. What James Eads has done is include two gentleman cards. One of them is card number 28 and one of them is card number 29. So if you chose to read with two gentlemen, you still get the two different ace, you know, playing card representations of the 28 and the 29. There are two lady cards. Again, one is 28 and one is 29 with the two different playing card associations. So again, if you chose to read with two ladies, there's an ace of hearts and an ace of spades represented. Then there are two person cards. Again, one of them is 28 and one of them is 29. And an ace of spades and an ace of hearts represented, right? So I had mentioned that, you know, just including an extra gentleman and lady doesn't quite resolve the barriers that I had identified, because it leaves the gender binary intact. It presumes that every querent or every reader can be represented by either gentleman or lady. And adding the person cards, I think, is a really effective way to address that issue. I love that there's a card number 28 and card number 29 of each, right? Because then any configuration, you can have an ace of spades and an ace of hearts, right? So you can have a person to represent you and a lady to represent your partner, could have a lady to represent you and a person to represent your partner, right? And still have a 28 and a 29, an ace of hearts and an ace of spades. An added benefit of this, and this is where I think, I don't know, maybe some people disagree with this, but whatever, I think it's a good thing. With so many significators, this opens up ways of reading for a person who would identify as having multiple significance, right? Lenormand is certainly a system with like a fixed number of cards, right? And something like the Grand Tableau is laid out in such a way to presume that you're reading with a deck that has 36 cards. But why not read with 38 cards? Why not read with 39 cards? If that means that you can represent, yourself and your relationships, or your relationship, or your querent and their relationships, or their non-monogamous relationship, or whatever kind of arrangement it may be, why not? I think that when it comes down to it, if a traditional system is built on really troublesome assumptions and invites exclusionary assumptions, in the way that it's set up, change it. Change it. There's no reason not to read with more cards. And I love that this one allows for that. It would be cool, I think, if this one had a couple of different significant cards in different colors, right? That would add an extra layer of being able to represent multiple significance. But I think that both of these decks, do a good job of coming up with a way around some of the barriers. Something additional that I wanted to mention about the green glyphs is that the cross card in Lenormand also comes with an alternate in this deck. And that alternate is the albatross, right? And this, may on the face of it not necessarily seem like a 2SLGBTQ issue, but for many of us, this image may be really ominous, right? And this may carry very painful and difficult associations and memories with it, right? Some readers, and not just some queer readers, some readers in general might not want this, right? So the albatross is James's way of offering an alternate choice there. And in his guidebook, I really love what he says about this. He says, at first, some of the cards may seem random and outdated, and they are. They are. You might be like me and feel like these symbols don't accurately represent your life. Not everyone is heterosexual or gender conforming or religious, right? So maybe that cross card doesn't work for you. You can take it out. If you would like to edit your deck to better fit you or your querent's life, i.e. the one asking the question is querent, you can substitute the cards for their like-numbered cards, right? And he says actually just make sure you have a total of 36 cards when you're using a reading and keep the others aside. But I see no reason to stick with just 36. We can come up with ways of reading with more than 36, and that's fine. If that means better representation for a querent or for me, and I can put all these cards in, why not, right? So that's my ramble on Lenormand. And I'm enjoying learning Lenormand. I am. It's a very different system from tarot. And sometimes I find the tarot I've mentioned before, my tarot knowledge is a bit of a barrier in some ways because I feel like they are so different. But I guess my concluding kind of thought here with regards to these decks and with regards to queer representation in Lenormand, when we have conversations about queer representation, in tarot, say, or whatever, in oracle, it doesn't matter what, often when we're talking about representation, what we're thinking about is the imagery, right? And we talk about whether or not the people depicted in the images are diverse, for example, right? Are diverse in various ways, right? Is there racial diversity? Are there queer people pictured, right? When we think about decks that are approachable and accessible and welcoming and supportive for queer readers or for queer querents, we think about whether, for example, perhaps a same-sex couple is depicted in the cards. But I think that what this, and that is relevant to Lenormand, right? That is absolutely relevant to Lenormand. And, I like, again, that these two decks, in some ways take that question out, right? In the sense that one is silhouetted, right? And the other has no humans at all. But that question about, who's in the pictures is certainly relevant. But here, I think the question about representation is very different. And here, whether a deck is queer positive or queer welcoming or queer affirming or queer inclusive is actually much less to do with who's pictured on the cards and what the people look like than it is about the structure of the system itself, right? And I think that we, as readers, those who are deck creators, wanting to create inclusive decks, we need to push ourselves to think beyond just the imagery, as important as the imagery is, right? As important as the language of the guidebook is, right? I appreciate a willingness on the part of these decks in different ways to actually make changes to the structure, in my view, of Lenormand themselves, or at least give you the tools that as a reader, you can make changes to that structure if that structure is not working for you. And I chose the word affirming in my title, right? Decks that are 2SLGBTQ plus affirming. And I chose the word affirming deliberately, right? Because I think that there's a difference between affirming and afterthought acknowledgement of your existence, right? And I think that affirming is a really good thing to aim for when we think about 2SLGBTQ plus representation in our cards and in our decks. So that's my thoughts on Lenormand. Please do share in the comments below if you have particular experience with Lenormand in this area, if you're a fellow queer Lenormand enthusiast, how you make the system work for you, how you make the cards work for your life, or if there's particular decks that stand out to you that I have not mentioned, please do share. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day.